Okay, this is a great question. How far off is the Canadian Parliament from parliaments around the world? How much do we deviate from, for instance, how the UK Parliament functions? And if we lose it, how do we get it back? There's no question. This has been a shock for me because I worked in Parliament in the 1980s. I have a good level of knowledge, and actually I'm one of the only members of Parliament who actually has any institutional knowledge to know that what's happening right now is wrong and scary. It's interesting how many MPs, when I tell them, look, I worked in the Office of the Minister of Environment in the 1980s, Mulroney was Prime Minister, and I was the Senior Policy Advisor to the Minister of Environment, and I wasn't a member of any political party in those days, I was just working on policy. But I tell Conservative members of Parliament, and for that matter, New Democrats and Liberals, that in those days, the Minister of Environment would give a speech, and I helped him write speeches, and we didn't run it by the Prime Minister's office first. No one would have imagined that we had to, and they're shocked because this is where the institutional knowledge is broken down. They think that what's happening now is normal. They think it's normal to be given a speech that they've never read, with which I said it's sort of like bad high school drama as they stumble through bad attacks on the other side of the house. And sometimes, you know, their heart isn't in it. Most members of Parliament are really good people and very civic-minded. So things have gone far off course, and the reason that things have gone off course is the disrespect towards Parliament as an institution, particularly from Stephen Harper. Now, it would be wrong to suggest that no Prime Minister in the history of this country has been described as a dictator. Jeffrey Simpson wrote a book on Jean Chrétien called The Friendly Dictatorship. So this is the unfriendly one. This is where we get the difference. And there's been a steady rise since the advent of the law that Michael Chong's bill would take apart. Since 1970, leaders of parties have, only since 1970, leaders of parties have the requirement to sign the nomination papers of candidates. This has given more power to leaders of parties. At the same time, around 1968, Pierre Trudeau created the notion that there was something called PMO, the Prime Minister's Office. It did not exist before Pierre Trudeau. It was under Lester B. Pearson, and I spoke to, before he passed away, a wonderful man named Tom Kent, who'd been principal secretary to Lester B. Pearson, described Lester B. Pearson's office as, which would have been called the Prime Minister's office if anyone thought about it, a handful of file clerks and stenographers. There were no power brokers, spin doctors. Well, now we're up to, Harper's PMO is $10 million a year of completely partisan spending for conservative hacks who run roughshod over their own caucus, who muzzle scientists and bully the bureaucrats, and yeah, so it needs to be fixed because, frankly, I'm very concerned that the next person who becomes Prime Minister will find it very convenient that all the levers of power to run absolutely everything in Ottawa are on one desk, his. Right? So I'd say hers, but the only way it's hers is if it's me, and I'll do this. You know, so I'll be dismantling all that. So we have to fix it now. We really do need to fix it now because it's an unholy degree of power the Prime Minister's office has. When Kevin Page was speaking in the local Green Party, we have an eminent speakers series, and he spoke at UVic. If you missed it, you can find it on YouTube. It was a fantastic speech. But Kevin Page said, as the first parliamentary budget officer, and his speech to us was his first speech after leaving that office, he said that every single institution of parliamentary democracy is under assault. That's how I see it, that's how he sees it. And he said that in terms of levers of power, the principle of parliamentary democracy is that the public purse is controlled by Parliament, and that is no longer the case. The last budget, by the way, Budget 2013, it's the first time I've ever reviewed, I've been reading budgets since I used to work at Sierra Club. Every year you go in and you get to lock up and you read the budget. The budget of 2013 is the first budget I've ever read from the federal government that didn't include any numbers. What? Now, of course, it included some numbers. It said we're going to spend X amount on this, but there was no tabular summary of what each department was getting. So there was no point of comparison of what each department got in 2013 compared to 2012. There was no summary at the back of the document that showed where the money was being spent. So there were just, we're going to give X million more to Via Rail, but you didn't know, okay, so there's $54 million more to Via Rail, but what's Via Rail's total budget? You couldn't find it. To get to those numbers, you have to wait for supplementary estimates. So the budget document is increasingly a public relations vehicle for the party in power. And again, that shows a contempt for Parliament, because a budget is